joining us today. Today is the third in a series of network webinars that Location Data Scotland has been hosting, and today's is in partnership with the Improvement Service, and we'll hear from Simon later on in the day. But of course, the focus is all around the power of location data. Just some housekeeping, just to kind of get things going. If I could just ask everyone to put their microphones on mute, because we are recording today's session, so it just makes the video a bit easier to listen to after the event, if that's okay. We do want today to be as interactive and engaging as it can be. We're running these events for the LDS community, so we would encourage you all to use the chat box. So use that to briefly introduce yourself and your business, share a bit of information around why you've joined today's event, what you want to achieve, and also the types of connections that you would like to make by being part of these events. And finally, the kind of structure of today is we've got two guest speakers. We'll let each of them do their presentations, and there'll be time for questions after each presentation. So again, any questions, drop them into the chat box and one of the team will pick those up and raise them with the speakers following their presentation. So what have we got in stock for you all today? So I'll briefly give an introduction to LDS. Many of you will already be familiar with the community, but I'll give an overview of Location Data Scotland, what we're aiming to achieve, and also give a bit of an update. And then we'll move on to hearing from the two guest speakers. So we're joined today by Simon Roberts from the Improvement Service, and he's going to share some information about the Spatial Hub. And then our second guest speaker is Aaron from Vahanomy, and he's going to share a bit of information about the company and the journey that they've been on in terms of using location data as part of their product development. And then we're moving into really the kind of networking and the interactive part of today, and we'll be using polls throughout the morning to encourage you all to get involved, share a bit of information about the data that you might have available to share, the type of data that you want to access, and we can open up the conversation through that discussion. I'll share more information on how the polls are going to work later on in the slides, but that's what we've got in stock. So just to kind of get things going, for those that aren't familiar with Location Data Scotland, so we are a project that is jointly funded by Scottish Enterprise, Scottish Government and the Geospatial Commission. And really, it's all come off the back of some work that we carried out in 2019, where we were testing the water to see if there was an appetite and a need for a community in Scotland. Needless to say, yes, there was, and that's why Location Data Scotland now exists. And what we're trying to do is break down some of the challenges that we identified during that consultation, one of which was the fact that there's a thriving sector in Scotland. There's lots of activity, but it's quite fragmented. So we're trying to use Location Data Scotland to create this inclusive community. We want to bring everyone together to unlock the value of location data. So we're doing that by connecting and informing and facilitating connections between public, private, third and academic sectors. And ultimately what we're trying to do is drive innovation, unlock skills and enable economic growth for Scotland. And the main way that we've been doing that is through the development of Location Data Directory. So this directory is available to anyone in Scotland, any organisation that is using or supplying location data. It's entirely free to get registered. You register and you build a profile, and that means that the LDS team can then help to support you and help you to access a range of benefits. So that could be finding customers or suppliers, signposting you to potential collaborative partners that you might want to form consortiums with, and also signposting you to, for example, funding opportunities as well. So as I say, it's entirely free. If you're not already registered, please do so. There'll be links shared in the chat box. At the moment, the directory is private. It's what the LDS team are using, one, to kind of map the sector and understand where the capabilities lie within Scotland, but also to get an understanding of the scale of geospatial in Scotland. That's the basis of what we're using to facilitate and enable these connections. There are, however, plans in the future that will be made available. So at the moment, it's purely for internal purposes, but we would encourage you all to get listed. As I say, that's really how you can get involved in the LDS community and how we as a team can support your business. So just to give you an overview of the community as it stands at the moment, it's an evolving, changing figure. So I think actually this slide's out of date. I think we're already up to 106 members. That's 106 members spread across 34 regions, across 23 industries as well. So the types of organisations, as I say, unsurprisingly, a huge industry representation within the directory, but also public, private and academic sectors and representatives as well within that directory. Key capabilities that are coming through, again, not surprising: data analytics, location intelligence, mapping, GIS. These are all key strengths that are coming through in the directory as it stands. But just to give you a flavour of the types of organisations that are in the directory and that LDS are working with and supporting. So we've got a whole range, so ranging from, for example, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and Alzheimer's Scotland, through to more kind of academic-led organisations like EDINA, right through to kind of startups and SMEs like Vahanomy, who we'll hear from today, and also Grand Bequest is another example of a kind of early stage startup company that we've been working with. So a huge range of organisations in there, and the types of help, as I say, that we've been providing is facilitating and enabling connections between partners, between organisations, but also to data holders, and that's really part of what the focus of today's event is. One of the main questions that the LDS team get asked is, where can we access data? Who's got data? And that's why we wanted to open up today's webinar and really start to have a conversation around who's got data, who are the data holders, how do those in need go about accessing that data? As saying, that's really the backdrop of today's webinar. So we're going to be holding polls, and Katrina will launch those into the chat, but I just wanted to kind of give a bit of an introduction to them. So you'll see in the top menu bar of your MS Teams that there is a polls option. When you click on that, you'll see the polls pop up on the right hand side, and that's where you can really get involved and give us your response to the key questions. So say, this is very much focusing on this afternoon's networking section of the event, but key questions are: do you have data sets available to share? If you do, what types of data is that? Also want to get a bit of a conversation around the types of data that those in the community are already using or have accessed, and also to consider what the gaps might be in data that is available. As I say, we're wanting to bring together the data holders with those that want to access the data, but we'll get stuck into the conversation later on in the day. If there's any kind of technical questions, please just drop them into the chat, and one of the team will try to help you in terms of accessing the polls. But without further ado, I want to get stuck into today's session. So as I say, it's all about the power of location data. We know that this data is kind of integral to developments right across a whole variety of sectors. And we wanted to showcase two of the organisations that we brought together through LDS. And the first of those that's going to present today, as I said, is Simon from the Improvement Service. So I'll stop sharing my screen now, and I'll introduce Simon to share his slides. That's great. We can see them now, Simon. So as I said, Simon is the Data and Engagement Manager with the Improvement Service, and he's going to give us all an insight into the Spatial Hub. So I'll hand over to you, Simon.
Thank you very much, Ashley, and thank you for inviting us along today. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you today about the Spatial Hub, and what it really is in a nutshell is a data sharing solution that can stimulate innovation and increase our productivity. So some of you may have heard about the Improvement Service, but what we are is essentially a not-for-profit company that's owned by the 32 local authorities in Scotland, as well as Costler and Solace. We've been around for about 17 years now, and we've grown from a handful of individuals back then to nearly 100 staff today. We now comprise two specific units within the IS. I'm part of a digital public services team that focus on digital transformation, but then we have a separate transformation, performance and improvement unit that are more policy focused, but we still engage with them a lot, and there's a lot of ideas that we share across those units. We're not non-political body. We're purely about delivery, so that makes us quite different from the likes of Costler and the LGA in England and Wales. And we work across the entirety of local government on solutions that can help all 32 local authorities together. We incorporate both public sector funding projects, but also commercial projects, and the Spatial Hub is an example of a commercial project, really. And we have a broad history of transformational digital and data services. We specialize in innovation, and we can take a few more risks than public sector bodies can, which is really useful because there's not the bureaucracy that you might have with some public sector bodies, and it means that we can act fast. If we have ideas, we can explore them and really push something out very quickly. So I wanted to bring this back to what was the problem we were initially trying to solve with the Spatial Hub. And what it all really boiled down to in the local government context was, and the public sector context, was trying to create a more consistent and comprehensive evidence base so that we could make better decisions by using local government data, or by sharing data more. But then, if you really believe in the truly transformational potential of good data, then what we're really looking to do is use data to improve the way that we humans live our lives for the betterment of all, including the planet. And I truly believe if we start using data better, then that's ultimately the goal. But taking it back to the origins of the problem, why do we have so many issues around mainly public sector data? And it really goes back to the way that we develop policy and legislation. It's often very much the what without the how. And this first sentence here is really the origins of where we're coming from. This is the policy that was given to local government around the naming and numbering of addresses and streets in the country. And the real problem here in the policy is this line, as they see fit. It means that with 32 local authorities, autonomous organizations, they could deliver this legislation however they wanted. And therefore the data was pretty much created however they wanted. And then if you look across the board at the legislation that results in data collection processes, we see this happening time and time again. You won't be able to read this because it's very small writing, but you can pick out certain words and sentences in the legislation, things like make available for public inspection, and published to the public in a means that they see fit. So we see this time and time again, and this is the origins of our problem. And really what it creates is this jigsaw puzzle of people creating data without any standardization and conformity. And so whenever anyone wants to get a full perspective of what's going on nationally on any one of these topics, they're confronted with this jigsaw puzzle of data. So that's really what we're looking to solve. So, as I said, the origins of what we're doing came from this problem with address data. Now, it was recognized that really we needed a national joined up address register if we were going to be able to deliver public services and ensure that everything was a bit more joined up. And the start of that journey was funding. So Scottish Government gave us some modernising government funding about 15 years ago, and that was imperative to start this process of sorting out this jigsaw puzzle of messy data. The next thing was that we had to set some standards for how that address data was going to be collected, and some conventions that everyone could follow. And we had a good start on that. There were some British standards around addressing, and we incorporated those into the Scottish model. The next thing was assigning governance and responsibility to those people that were responsible for collecting the data, and creating a network of individuals that could come together and embrace these standards and share their knowledge and work collectively together. By bringing all of that data from local government into one central place, it enabled us to create one national data set that was joined up and standardized. And that had far more increased value than the sum of all the parts. And therefore, it started to be used a lot more across the public sector. And it started to ramp up in importance as it was used to deliver more and more public services. And then we realized that we could connect this data to other data sets. So in the last few years, we've been joining every address in the country to every street in the country and assigning unique identifiers to it. So we're building up a digital infrastructure of what our physical environment looks like. And that's really important if we're going to analyze it, join it to other data sets, and improve it, as I said at the start, for the betterment of our lives, the way we live our lives. And the other crucial component to this is, because that was a really valuable national data set, it persuaded commercial bodies to enter into a partnership with us to take this data to the markets. So we've been in partnership with Ordnance Survey, who've been selling the street and address data to the public sector for several years now. And ultimately, that has enabled us to move on and say, well, we did this for addresses and streets. Why can we do it for any other data that local government was collecting in the line of its business? And that really is the origin of the Spatial Hub. We invested some of that money in the Spatial Hub as a proof of concept. And what it enables people, data custodians, to do within local government is to go online, to submit data. We then publish it in the background as national data sets that anyone could, well, within reason, anyone can access. And then we also offer this preview facility. And if you want to just dip into the Spatial Hub, that's probably the place to start, where you can go and start to visualize what all these data sets look like, what the coverage is like, which local authorities are supplying some data but not others. So I very much would recommend you have a look at this after this talk. So what the tech stack looks like in the Spatial Hub is a series of open source components and some commercial elements that we've really stitched together, and we've evolved over the years. So top left hand corner there is what an open source product called CCAM, which we use to register the data sets that are provided to us. Now, previously we used to use WordPress, but we don't use that any longer. So CCAM delivers most of that registration portal. We then pull the data on the left-hand side with a Python script into our back area, where we store it in a Postgres system. We use the commercial product that we really couldn't do without is FME. We use that to do all of our transformation behind the scenes. And we do error reporting and quality assurance of the data. But then the way that we serve it out, again, on the top right-hand corner there, is using an open source product called GeoServer. And that really gives us everything that we need to make this work. And that tech stack that we've built is very much built around data publication standards that really, by legislation, we should all be doing in the public sector in Scotland. Now, what we have to do is publish metadata under that legislation, and the Scottish Government have already built a tool to do that. It's called the spatialdata.gov Scot site. So every public sector body in the country should be publishing metadata about their data sets there. And then the Spatial Hub deals with these other two components. A view service, which is for GIS people, it's a web mapping service that we deliver. And then there's a download service, and that's a web feature service. And those are what GeoServer really provides for us. But what we've built is a connection between the spatialdata.gov.scot metadata and the Spatial Hub. And they're passing data and information between those two systems, and it really works really well for us. So getting on to what data the Spatial Hub has started to collect over the past 6 or 7 years, I guess the key theme that we've been focusing on is the planning sector. There's a whole bunch of data that local government collects about planning constraints, about development plans, so local development plans, and about planning applications and how they're managed. And there's a quick visualization of what some of this data looks like. You've got planning applications on there, the LDP categorized, and then some constraints data. I guess the second key area is around environment and pollution. So we have a whole bunch of data sets around air quality and contamination and designations for biodiversity in the environment. And we also we store a bunch of layers that were provided to us by Green Space Scotland as a result of the Green Heat in Green Spaces programme several years ago. So there's a whole plethora of data sets in there. And there's just a little selection of a few of them. Third theme is around community and society. So as you might imagine, local government have a lot of responsibility about documenting where their assets are, things like school catchments. They deal with polling data, for instance. And as you can see, that there's a whole bunch of different categories within some of these data sets. And there's lots in there that can be analysed and can be used for greater purposes. And really the fourth theme there for local government is around roads and transport. As local government have a responsibility for designating core paths, for looking at car parking, for cycling networks. And as you can see, when all this data is brought together, it's incredibly complex, but it gives us a really good idea of what's going on across our communities. Since the local government was created, we've also found other sectors outside of local government that need to be able to use a platform like the Spatial Hub for data sharing. So we've started to publish health service data from Public Health Scotland and some of the NHS boards across the country. That was particularly important a few years ago when we had the pandemic, because nobody had ever plotted where all these really important health service locations were for any analytical capabilities. So we're trying to facilitate that as well. And then we've also had the utilities companies come to us and say, well, look, we have to share all of our data with local government. We need to access local government data. We've entered into a data sharing partnership with them, and it's a sort of quid pro quo arrangement. So they're both receiving each other's data. So this is an example of the gas network in, I think it's Aberdeen. And then we've also expanded into academia now. So we're starting to publish the outputs, the spatial data outputs from some academic projects. And just recently, we've started to publish this data about the opportunities for creating geothermal heating from coal mines, for instance. So really, we've built a really flexible platform that can really expand and share whatever data is needed. So the current situation on who can access all this data within the Spatial Hub, it was predominantly built as a public sector tool. So the licensing around the public sector geospatial agreement enables all of that sharing with the public sector and its contractors, and that's worked very well. A few years ago, we also entered into an agreement with ADINA to start sharing this data via their Digimap platform for the academic and research community. So that's the Digimap platform there. And I've already mentioned the bespoke data sharing agreement with the likes of SGN, and that's a model that we'd dearly like to copy with other utility companies and other people that really need to share their data with local government. And then another option here is around using an exploration license so that the private sector can get an idea of what they could and should be doing with our data if they could access it. So we're using the GeoSex exploration license that the Geospatial Commission created and simply repurposing that. But our real problem is we haven't found a solution to give commercial access to these data sets. And that's a problem because of the metadata that we're publishing online, lots of private sector bodies are finding our data by typing in simple Google keyword searches. Because the metadata is well structured, it's in a search engine optimized platform, we're getting numerous hits. I receive probably five to 10 inquiries a week, and our list of companies is growing and growing and growing. So we need to find a solution to get the data out to these people. But the big elephant in the room really is who pays for something like the Spatial Hub and how. Obviously, we used the money we were getting from address data sales at the outset to deliver a proof of concept, but that's not sustainable in the long term. So what we've always been having in mind is a freemium model where we get some public sector money to pay for open data, but we also have the ability to commercialize some of the more valuable data sets, just as we did with address data. So we've been going through every single data set that we currently capture and really assessing what the commercial value is within some of those data sets. The key ones are things like building standards and planning applications and things like that. And what we really want is to enter into another commercial partnership, like we did with Ordnance Survey, give all this data to a commercial partner, and they can take it to the market because they're the specialists. That is not what we specialize in. So we want someone to work with us. And we really have 6 options for how that might work. We're quite open to somebody coming along with a fairly large subscription fee for all of this data, and then there's no commission to pay. The other options are that you pay a smaller subscription fee, and then we would expect a commission back, either high, medium, or low. And then the opposite of that, really, for the smaller SMEs that want to partner with us, there's the possibility of not paying a subscription fee at all, I guess, and purely giving us a commission back on any sales that could be made of this data. We really don't know how it's going to play out, but we're fairly sure there's a commercial opportunity there that can help sustain the service that we've built. And then the final option there, as we've done with SGN, is a reciprocal data sharing. So if any commercial body really needs to pass their data to local government, for instance, mobile phone technology, that sort of data, local authorities really need that to get a sense of how people are moving through their town centres, for instance, that would be another option potentially. So yeah, get in touch with us if anyone has an interest in that opportunity. And really, the next stage of all this, we've dealt with, everybody should know about the FAIR data principles around findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability. Often people put a Q at the start of that, QFAIR. That's really where we need to get to. We need to start improving the quality of these data sets that are coming out of local government. They're collected for one singular purpose, and often just squirreled away. And we're really saying, well, look, if we expose that data to more and more people, it can be used for more and more purposes, and it can be used to innovate. So this is where we'll be moving in the future, on focusing on these issues. But the reality is that data is only ever as good as the importance that's placed on it. That's a quote that I came up with at a conference a few years ago, and it was made very real to us when the pandemic hit. I don't think we really had systems in place to capture the data that was needed to address a global pandemic, but that ramped up very, very quickly. And dashboards like this Public Health Scotland one were suddenly getting 40 million hits a day, and that data became incredibly important. So the more that we can get local government data used, I think the more importance that will be placed on it, the more that we can lobby people to keep improving this data and putting more resources into it. And this is an article I read just last week. The government has cottoned on to this, really. They accept that the public sector need to be sharing more of their data. We just need to find the resources, the funding and the capability to make that happen. So I guess my ask of you is, what else could we and should we be capturing more and sharing with you on your behalf? So thanks for listening, and please let me know what you think.
That's great. Thank you very much, Simon. I think the fact that you are trying to bring together the kind of public and private aspects is huge. I mean, as I said at the beginning, that is one of the main questions that we get through LDS, is people know that there's data there. Who has it, and how do we go about accessing it? And I think the fact that you're trying to do that through the Spatial Hub addresses lots of the challenges that members in the LDS community have been raising. There are questions coming through. So one of the questions is, when will the Improvement Service release the data that they plan to release under the OGL? Okay, so that is likely to happen in the next month or so. We're still having discussions with Scottish Government about funding, and depending on those conversations, yeah, the data will be released in the near future. I can't say any more than that. Yep, no, that's fine. I suppose in the other aspect, probably selfishly, as the kind of chair of today, I'll ask the question on behalf of lots of the companies within the LDS community, but today's an example of kind of using LDS to facilitate connections to the Improvement Service, but how do others, if you mentioned these exploratory licenses, how can others kind of work with you to kind of establish one of those licenses and find out a bit more about how they can work with you?
This is very easy. Just drop us a line. There are contact details on our website, or drop me an email directly, and we have no qualms about giving anyone an exploration license. They last for about 12 months, I think, but it allows anyone to explore the art of what's possible with some of this data.
Yeah, no, that's great. As you say, it's a starting point, isn't it? If you're looking to move towards these more commercial models so that the data can actually properly be made available to the private sector, then that's a great, the exploratory licenses are a good first step for lots of companies, particularly early stages companies who are just, well, one, they're financially constrained themselves, but two, they're maybe just trying to find out what they need, what their actual data needs are. So it's a good starting point. Another question's come through, and that is, will there be any central guidance on data sharing for the household level for the vulnerability identification?
It's a really good question. It's not really something that the Spatial Hub project is working on, but I often take my spatial hat off and I delve into the realms of what other people are doing around data, and this issue of identifying vulnerable households and vulnerable people in the context of cost of living. It's being looked at by various networks at the moment. And there's some really good stuff coming from down south, actually from England, about a project called SAVI, which stands for the Scalable Approach to Vulnerability via Interoperability. And it's all about how we can use data standards to stitch data sets together. Key component, obviously, is the unique property reference number of every household in the country. If we can get everybody to start capturing that within their data at the household level or the address or the property level, then we have that that golden thread really that enables us to join data sets together to gain insight, which will allow us to help people.
That's great, Simon. I suppose a final question from me. I think you've kind of showcased the plethora of data that's available. Is there any different types of data sets that you think will be coming on board to the Spatial Hub that might be of interest to the LDS community in the future?
Well, we know that SEPA are about to open their flood zones for Scotland. I don't know how they're intending to do that, but they could certainly make use of our API service via GeoServer so that people can literally just stream that data into their GIS applications. We also know that people like planners, they need access to health outcomes data in a geospatial format. Now, the NHS and Public Health Scotland haven't traditionally been publishing their data like that. It's often just in CSV files. So we want to start geospatializing some of that really useful health data so that it can be used in the context of developing local development plans and things like that.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. That's a super introduction to the Spatial Hub for anybody on the call who's not aware of it. As Simon said, the improvement service are very open to engagement, so you can either come through myself and I can facilitate the connections, but Simon and the team are more than happy to kind of have conversations around how you can access the data and discuss these exploratory licenses, and importantly, if there's interest more from a kind of commercial model perspective, obviously Simon's keen to hear from the private sector and get a bit of feedback around those models as well. So thank you very much, Simon, that's super. Great, and now we're going to move on to our next speaker, who is Aaron from Vahanomy. As I say, Aaron's a perfect example of a company that LDS has been working with, and we facilitated an introduction to the improvement service. So Aaron, I'll hand over to you and you can give us a bit more information around Vahanomy and the importance of data to the company.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Can you see my slide?
Yeah, they're looking good. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Arun Gopinath, CEO and co-founder of Vahanomy. So we are an Edinburgh-based company. We started off in 2019, and we started off wanting to be a charging point operator. And we were looking to set up ultra-fast charging points, which are very capital intensive. And when we were setting up these charging points, we were looking at data to analyze the suitability of that location, and if our investment in that particular location was going to be, secure, and what were the risks, what were the opportunities, and over a period of time, what would be the viability of that charging point. Having looked at that, I mean, we found that accessing data was quite difficult, and then we started also looking at, was there any tool available to analyze this data that someone else was doing? And we started speaking to our competitors as well as other stakeholders in the industry, and most people were just pretty much going with existing infrastructure they had and a gut feel based on some basic data that you could easily access to set up these charging points. Having done that, I mean, I'll just tell you a couple of products that we have. So we're developing a location analysis tool to analyze the opportunity, viability, and risk of electric vehicle charging point before they're installed. And we also have a marketplace for the electric vehicle charging infrastructure ecosystem called charger.io, which we're launching next week. So to give you a kind of background, 27% of all greenhouse gases emitted are from transport. This is 2019 data, but it's the most reliable data that you can have right now because of the pandemic and the change patterns. So if we need to tackle this problem, one of the things is how do we decarbonize, and electric vehicles is one of the solutions, and the most probable solution available at the moment. So in the Scottish context, by 2030, we need there'll be 1 million electric vehicles on our roads, requiring 30,000 public electric vehicle chargers. And at the moment, we have less than 10% of this installed. And this has taken us about 12 plus years to get to this point. And we have just over 7 years to get to the remaining 90+% of the capacity that needs to be installed. So the issues that we faced was that between 50 to 75% of the cost of setting up an EV charging point or station is non-equipment costs. It's a cost of getting your permissions, doing your civil work, doing your electrical works, paying for contractors, doing your, paying for permissions, paying for permits, things like that. So if you get your location wrong and you want to move your asset, you have a depreciated charging point, and you've lost between 50 to 75% of that capital that you've invested. Access to data, as I said earlier, is quite difficult was difficult to access, and it's available in different forms and through different sources. It's about bringing it all together, making it easy. There are consultants who have told us it's taken them up to 4 months to put data together to analyze and provide insights on a particular data location. And then there is a shortage of scouts to kind of find locations for electric vehicle charging points. Right now, most of the infrastructure that's gone in has been installed by local authority, and they've gone to their own kind of infrastructure where, their own parking lots, their own places like their offices, their community centers, and things like that. And so the remaining sites that we need to find will be outside, both for the private sector and public sector, and they then need to look at that and do an analysis of what's available, and what the opportunity, viability, and risk is of that. And like I mentioned earlier, up to more than 10 times the existing capacity is what needs to be installed by 2030 to meet the demand for vehicles, electric vehicles, over here in Scotland. So last week there was a study also from MIT, which said there was a report from MIT that said about the importance of finding about the locations, about where you place electric vehicle charging points, both for better usage of the grid, and also for better suitability to the user itself and therefore the operator. So if you don't find a good location for a charging point, this is what you will end up with. You will have to move the equipment and relocate it to a place, to some other place. So we developed this location data analysis tool for electric vehicle charging points. And to be clear that this is it's a B2B product. It is to help operators, charging point operators, to identify locations in terms of risk, opportunity, and viability. So in terms of opportunity, there is data available. There are people who are doing analysis on opportunity, but there is very less data that's being done in terms of risks and viability. So in terms of risk, we're talking about risk to the equipment, risk to the end user, and also risk to the capital, that meaning risk to the business model and the revenue model. And in terms of viability, it is looking at not just data as it stands, but also to the lifetime of the product of the charging of the charger. So through its financing lifetime as well as the product lifetime, because what may be a good site today may not be a good site 2 years down the line, and it can, in some cases, a site that does not look like a great opportunity today may turn out to be a good location as time goes by. So we use 105 market research data points for our tool, and so we've spoken with how have we come up with this 105 data points? We've spoken to all the stakeholders in the electric vehicle charging infrastructure ecosystem to see what is required. What does the user want? What does the operator want? What do installers need? What do infrastructure investors need? So a mix of all that. So we can provide this analysis and insights at the moment offline, but as volumes of requests will increase, we will use AI to provide that analysis also, because strategy for different operators will be different. So our data analysis tool, these are some screenshots from our tool. It's just a few of the parameters that you can see. It fetches data which we have verified and provides geospatial information. So the geospatial information that we use, each of the data points is geospatial information. It's qualitative, quantitative, and also sentiment data that we use. And it generates insights for charging locations. So we are addressing a market opportunity about 4.8 billion. It's a very conservative figure. And people who would use it would be charging point operators, EV infrastructure investors, auto companies that are setting up their own charging point infrastructure. It is government, local authorities, commercial property owners, and also consultants and grid operators. And it will also be that app providers will need our information to do B2C kind of services. So in terms of the challenges that we have, it's the biggest one has been in terms of sourcing of data. And in sourcing of data, is the data accurate? Is it current? Is it available in a standardized format? Are we able to, how easily are we able to handle it? And also, how affordable is that data? Because we have 105 data points, and the cost of bringing each of those together, it adds up. And so in the end, our service and the insight that we are providing has to be affordable for our customers as well. We also have, challenges in terms of developing predictive models for grid capacity. What kind of requirement is there? What are the gaps in the grid capacity, and also for e-mobility and transport and energy demand, and for doing predictive models, risk modeling for energy transport data. So as a startup, we were introduced to Location Data Scotland, and had a meeting with Ashley, and she was very helpful, because in helping us to be introduced, we needed, we were talking about the challenges about data and the different sources of data that we needed. And she also, signed us up onto the membership database. We had some PR support from Location Data Scotland, which also gave us traction in terms of people knowing what we were doing and what challenges we were trying to address. So we got introductions to IS, Ordnance Survey, the Scottish Government, Register of Scotland, and also the Geospatial Commission, which is also doing some work on identifying what are the barriers in installing electric vehicle charging points. So we got introduced to the improvement service, and a meeting with Simon, and Simon spoke to us about what the options were, that they were looking to commercialize data, but they didn't know at the moment how to go about it. So he said, look, take a look at, have some access to the spatial data. So we signed an exploratory license with IS to look at the different data that is there. So we can get probably about 40 of our data points that are there on our that we use on our location data analysis tool through the exploratory license, and it's been very helpful for us. But there have also been challenges in terms of the data that's there. Some of the things are the standardization of the content and the frequency of data submission across local authorities. So some local authorities are good with certain data, some are good with some other type of data, and there is no consistency in the way data is updated and how often it's updated, and what data is updated as well. It would be helpful for us as a startup to have links with the SIMD data and the Spatial Hub data, so that it could be a one-stop shop where we could go for public sector data to access public sector data, or whichever way the government does it, whether it's IS or someone else. And also in terms of standardizations of data, particularly pertaining to electric vehicles. And there I've given a QR code to the US standards that they recently released at the end of last month. And it's a very comprehensive and list which kind of puts a legal requirement on anybody accessing public funding for setting up EV charging infrastructure to provide that data and make it available publicly. And the standards are quite well defined in it, so it's a good source to probably look at. Just for us to acknowledge the different organizations that have supported us. We've had support from Data Lab. We've had PhD students from there who we've hired. We worked with ETP, Travel Tech for Scotland, Harriet Watt. We were on the AI accelerator of the University of Edinburgh, which just ended last week. We received funding from Scottish Enterprise and Transport Scotland to expand our tool to include heavy-duty vehicles. That project comes to an end tomorrow, but we've made great progress with it, and that's it. I mean, I look forward to hearing from you all. If you have any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Aaron. That's fantastic. I think it demonstrates the need for public sector to open up access to data for companies like yourself, and having these exploratory licenses as a good, as Simon had sort of emphasised, as a good starting point for it. But I think it's important that we also realise that there are still challenges and there are still gaps within available data as well. You mentioned that through the Spatial Hub, there's 40 points of data that you were able to use. That's 40 points out of those 105 data points that you mentioned. Yeah.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. And that in itself demonstrates the power of these kind of types of relationships between the public and private sector. I think that's key, but we've got some questions coming through. Simon, you've raised a question. I'm not sure if it's just to Aaron or if it's to the private delegates that are here today, but I'll raise it, and Aaron, you can kind of give your perspective, and if anyone else wants to chip in, then please just use the kind of raising your hand tool. But the question from Simon is, how could or should the private sector make the case to the public sector that resources need to be put into data improvement? So you've touched upon it within your presentation, Aaron, around some of the challenges that still exist, but what do you think the case needs to be from the private sector so that it enables the public sector to open up access, I suppose, is where you're coming from, Simon?
Yeah, I mean, for us, although we say that, we use only 40 of those, we could use 40 of those data points. In reality, we could use up to 60. It's just that it's not, because there is no consistency of data available across different local authorities. It makes it more kind of difficult. It increases our work to look at this as one source, and then we don't have the consistency of data from there. But other things also include, like having some utilities data and of different utility companies, and also in terms of the grid, if it can be integrated to see what's available in terms of capacity, and also with off-grid data, because there are off-grid energy sources also available, if that can be brought in, and planning data, if it can be more kind of tighter, because there is planning data, but it's not granular. If we can get planning data specifically for electric vehicle charging points, that would be great, because right now when you look at it, it says, if you look at it, about the average is about 47 weeks for planning permissions, but we don't know how that, in a granular manner, how it is for electric vehicle points, charging points.
That's great. Thanks, Aaron. Other questions that are coming through. So Scottish Enterprise are particularly keen to understand if the support that you receive from Data Scotland, is that critical and almost an enabler in you achieving what your business aspirations are?
It is because as a startup, I mean, with limited resources, you would be spinning wheels trying to get contacts in different and it's opened doors for us, which would have been much more difficult. I mean, if we wouldn't know who to go to start with. I mean, if we contacted, we didn't even know that Improvement Service had that data. And in that case, where, it would have probably taken a few more emails for someone to, respond to us. Here, when there's a direct kind of introduction, it makes it much more easier for us to do that. So I think with all the organizations I listed there, we would have struggled to get to the right person. We would have been sending emails to generic email addresses and waiting forever, especially in the current scenario where it's very difficult to get through generic email addresses because people are working in different places now post-pandemic. So it becomes even more important, the support that we got from LDS, and also, the publicity that we've got from you, from the PR work and things like that as well.
No, that's great. And I mean, that's why LDS is here. We're here to help businesses. We want to work with businesses of all kind of stages, but we can really add value at that early stage because, as you say, we can be the conduit into many other introductions and into other organisations. So that's great. Thank you, Aaron. Two kind of final questions, I suppose, is coming through there. Someone's asking, could you repeat how you analyse data for the potential EV sites?
So, I mean, we're using 105 data points, and those data points actually, those 105 data points is about 2+ years of research with stakeholders. So really, that is a secret sauce, if you ask us what it is. So, we use that, combine that to and our knowledge of the industry now to provide insights on the opportunity, viability, and risk that a potential location has. So it also makes sure that transport planners, operators, infrastructure investors have that data as well and insights to make the right decision so that it's working for everybody. And that crucial for us is also that there's just transition happening in terms of when you're moving from decarbonizing transport.
That's great. And one final question, which is actually quite an interesting one because it does come back to the kind of private versus public data, is were the data challenges that you outlined any different between public sector suppliers of data versus private sector? So, for example, utilities. Do you think the challenges differ between the two types of data providers?
Yeah, they do. I mean, because things are in different formats, and but I'm not the technical person on this, so I will not say too much into that because.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And I suppose, I mean, certainly from the LDS perspective, comparing the public and private, the private side of things is often a lot more difficult, but also a lot more costly to access as well. Yes. So particularly if you're an early stage company, it's just not, yes, the data might be what you need and very good, but it's just not practical for you to be able to access that. Simon, you've popped your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to, sorry, if you finished with that question, I just wanted to address one of the points that Andy raised in the chat. It's about planning applications data. And I think that's one of the key data sets that Aaron, you mentioned you needed access to. So I mentioned in my presentation that we're now focusing on the quality of data, how it can be collected more frequently, how it can be more accurate, etc., etc. Now, all that stuff costs money. In the commercial sector at the moment, what tends to happen with planning applications is that somebody somewhere is scraping a website or looking at PDF documents and digitizing it by hand somewhere around the world and trying to commercialize it that way. Now, what we have built is a pipeline that connects to each of the local authority source system that collects plan applications on a daily basis, and we can suck that data out nightly. And that's the most up-to-date plan applications that anyone will have ever been able to collect together at a national level. And that is why we think there is commercial value within that. We've already paid a lot of money to build that solution. So it's almost like we really need to recoup the money that we've invested in that to keep the Spatial Hub service going year on year. We still need to pay for our jobs. We still need to pay for the digital infrastructure that we've created. So that's what I mean about moving to that next stage in terms of improving the way that we bring data together and share it.
Yep, no, that's great. Thanks, Simon. And I think both presentations today have shown that there are opportunities and, importantly, the power of the data. Aaron, do you want to jump in before?
Yeah, I also want to say, I mean, it's not just Scottish data, it's also then to see that, does it integrate well with all the rest of the nations together? Because otherwise it becomes, you're working with very kind of specialized, different geographies, and then having to redo things when you're going, because our service is, we're looking at a global this thing, but even within the UK, if we can have more standardized, that would be great.
That's great. Thank you very much to both of you for being our guest speakers today, and also to delegates for kind of raising the questions. As I said, we have been running the polls throughout the course of the first part of it, and I think we're going to now move on to sharing the results of those polls. And really what we want to do in this section of the event is really kind of to encourage everyone to get involved. Put your hand up, take yourselves off mic, please do get involved, because as Simon and Aaron have shown, there is power in these connections, but we need to have a better understanding of what data exists, who's got the data, how can we go about sharing it, and we can use LDS to facilitate these connections, but we're really keen to kind of open up the conversation to the members, you guys, and the community, and start to have a broader conversation around what exists, and how we go about bringing the data holders and those in need of access to data together. So Katrina has shared her screen with us all. So on today's event, 55% have said that yes, you do have data available to share. And the types of data has been shown. I would like to invite anyone who's answered yes to that first question. If you want to raise your hand or put yourself off mute and jump in and tell us a wee bit more about the data that you do have available to share. It's an opportunity for you, as I say, to meet potential end users of your data. Andy, you've got your hand up. Do you want to jump in?
I've always got my hand up. Any opportunity to speak? Thank you, Ashley. Yeah, I'll put my camera on as well, and you can all have a good go up at who's the guy who's been talking. Listen, so LandClan, hi, we're a data integrator. We've been working with Simon and the Improvement Services to try and help understand what the value of some of their data is. So, we provide a couple of things. We provide an app which allows people to do multi-criteria analysis to find the optimum sites for things. But one of the key things that we're doing and why we're here today is to talk about our address-based data set. So we basically process 400 attributes for every property around Great Britain. And that goes from land ownership, obviously not in Scotland, but land ownership, price paid, EPCs, environmental, historical, heritage, social, demographic, index of multiple deprivation, all of those different issues around that, so that it basically is a one size fits all. People can just take that data set away. It's made in simple tables. There's joins pre-made between all the tables, and you can create your own data set and go and do whatever it is that you want to do. That could be finding low density, low quality housing that needs to be redeveloped, or it could be identifying vulnerable people, as one of the previous questions was, and working out what the sources of those vulnerabilities are, and can you integrate that with the development plan. And then ideally what we'd like is to see MPF4 as an opportunity, really. The fact that Scotland has a integrated spatial plan from all three levels of government is really great. Wouldn't it be great if everyone was using the same evidence base? A lot of that is where I really applaud the work that IS are doing in bringing that together. But it needs to be comprehensive enough for strategic option appraisals, and then granular enough for like a localized consultative approach. So we like to have one data set that we can make available commercially to all the consultants, but equally make it available through the Scottish Government to all three levels of government. That's me.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much for sharing that, Andy. And if there is anyone on the call who is interested in what Andy's just shared with us, I presume, Andy, you're happy for me to facilitate any connections that come through as a...
Of course, yeah. Thanks, Ashley, and I'll be putting my details on the LDS website.
Drop them into the chat. Yeah,
Thank you.
and Andy will be part of the directory as well, so it's easy for me to facilitate those connections. No, that's super. Thanks very much, Andy. Are there any others that want to kind of jump in and share a bit of information about the data that they have available? No volunteers. I suppose there's two examples on the call of the types of data providers that are available, but obviously through the directory, we can facilitate connections to others that we're aware of. One of the other questions was around what data sources people have used or have accessed. I'm keen also to get a better understanding of those. So if you did answer that question again, please feel free to jump in. We need to have involvement and engagement from the delegates today. This is your opportunity to network with the data holders. So if you have used or accessed any data sets, then please do feel free to pop your hand up and share with the other delegates who those data sources have been and how you went about accessing them. No volunteers to raise their hand. No. I think one that most definitely will get people going is what the gaps are in the data, because as I say, through LDS, that is the kind of main thing that people come to, is where can they access the data, and the reason they're trying to understand where they can go is because there are gaps in it. So the types of things that have been shared on the poll today is local plans, which I think we've partly addressed through some of the conversation, things like land ownership and utilities, also the GIS formats, which Aaron has raised. Is there any other gaps and challenges that anyone would like to share? As I say, there's a forum here for us to kind of discuss those, and also discuss how we can potentially go towards trying to address some of those gaps as well, bearing in mind that you've got data holders here that are willing to and seeking to actually address some of the challenges. Simon?
Just said the big one in the middle there, land ownership. We have started to collect some land ownership data from local authorities. Some of them have this digitized, but some of them it's still on paper records in the basement somewhere. It's needed if we're going to get to 100% complete national digital register of who owns what in Scotland. But how we get to that 100% is a bit up in the air at the moment, because it's going to take a lot of time and effort to get all this stuff into one place. We've got it for about 7 or so local authorities, but it's something Registers of Scotland are well aware of. And their ScotList project back in the day was supposed to bring a lot of this information together, but it's a very difficult thing to do.
No, I mean, there's challenges on both fronts, isn't there? I think that's why it is a difficult area. Andy, do you want to jump back in?
Yeah, thank you. I could put my hand down. Look, I think it's an area where the private sector can really help. I think one of the barriers that registers are finding is that they want to get it to the absolute nth degree of quality before they release it. And I think sometimes the perfect is the enemy of the good, and we could just get it out there commercially. I'd buy it now, and I'll use it, and I'll tell you where the mistakes are and where the errors are, and we can get it fixed. And we do that a lot quicker if we just get at the stage we've got to now. If we just get it released, get people using it, and as soon as people start paying for it, they'll come back quickly and tell you where it's gone wrong. So rather than trying to spend lots of time now combing through it, let's just get it out there. I was kind of wondering if the forthcoming sort of the land reform bill is an opportunity to potentially put some legislation in around this, and actually, Registers of Scotland are between a rock and a hard place. There's no legislative framework actually, making them make this available. So if they had that, then they could overcome a lot of the hurdles around publishing it and a lot of the things that are potentially holding them back, and then just get it out.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Your first point there, Andy, about the quality of data. If we had waited to get all of the data in the Spatial Hub up to a certain level of quality before we published it, we probably would still be at proof of concept stage. It's an iterative process. We knew that we needed to sort of expose this data to show the art of what might be possible. And then it's about building the business case for improvement. which is sort of my challenge to the private sector. If you're desperate for this data, how can we create a compelling business case to put in front of senior execs in the public sector bodies to say, look, we really need to be investing in this stuff because it's important. Going back to my first slide, if you really believe this is about improving people's lives, and we're missing a massive opportunity here because we're not sorting out the data that will drive some of that improved living.
And the interesting point there, Andy, that you're raising is that there's a need for private and public sector to actually come together to make a lot of that happen as well.
Absolutely.
By actually working together, you can open it up more.
Definitely. Yeah. There's a lot on inward investment, a lot of work on inward investment that we were starting to do last year. Trying to create some numbers with the Scottish Government. Obviously, now other people have changed. So we're going to have to start that work again. I think the transparency and democracy argument carries some weight, but it's not enough to get people over the edge. There needs to be some economic fact. And I think if we talk about what are the costs of hidden households, because we're not developing enough housing stock, those kind of things. Those are the business case arguments that we need to be using. But in terms of data set that's missing there, that's why I haven't added it on. But I think biodiversity is a key one. There's lots going on in the nature finance space. It'd be really good to integrate that data alongside everything else that's going on. If you're going to create one spatial plan, it should encompass all of that.
No, that's great. And as I say, that we want to hear what the needs of the community are, because, as I say, LDS is here to act in your best interests. And if we don't know what your challenges are, we can't help you to kind of tackle them. So please use either today's forum as a way to kind of raise things, or you can get in touch with us individually as well. Roger, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. So I was just going to come in on what was being talked about there about local government and their ability to improve some of these data sets. I maintain the National Street Gazetteer and rely on the 32 local authorities supplying me with data on a regular basis, and it's a piece by piece management to get all of the data in the right format. And it's I was on a training call, delivering a training course this morning to 3 local authorities and 2 Transport Scotland companies, and the local authorities are struggling with the abilities and the time and the costs of updating the data sets they've got, and a lot of the local authorities are cutting money out of budgets, which is going to cause a great turmoil across for service delivery. And it is unfortunately one of those economic facts that that the money isn't there for them to go and do all the things that they wanted to do. And coming up on with Andy's point about missing households, I did raise a question a couple of weeks ago at a conference to sort of say, why were there so many missed energy tokens that were given to people on prepaid meters? Why were there so many that were not taken up? Are these households that don't exist or sort of are under the radar and things like that, and sort of getting the data from local authority level on the words that come from my head on deprivation and things like that. How can we all as a community keep all of these things alive so that everybody's got to put some value on it as part of that?
No, that's great, and I think you raise a fair point there around the fact that the local authorities themselves are stretched and constrained, which, as you say, then has a knock-on impact upon their ability to kind of pull together the data as well. Andy, did you want to jump back in on that one? I know that your hand went up and then it went down.
That was a mistake, sorry.
Okay, no worries. Simon, I think you were next to raise your hand.
So this links back to really what Ross was asking from Inverclyde in the chat there about how do we use data to identify vulnerable households. Now, we have real problems here because the likes of DWP, whilst they will share data about what households are claiming benefits and they share the UPRN, they have stipulated that that data set must not be linked to any other data to gain any other inference. Now, that is a massive hindrance for us in the public sector if we're going to identify the people that need help when we hit these crises, like the pandemic, like the cost of living crisis, like any other issue that's going to happen in the future. So we really need some solutions to this information governance problem. And that really needs to come from the Scottish Government, I think. And we need to challenge the likes of DWP to essentially open the way so that we as public sector servants can start to join these data sets together. Most of them are spatial, most of them are at a household level, but we need to be able to do this if we're going to deliver the public services that our citizens expect.
That's good. Thanks for that, Simon. Aaron, you also put your hand up.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the place-based tool and, the consultations that are taking place across, I don't know if it's being done still, but there's a lot of qualitative data that's gathered by local authorities through different types of consultations and other things. And can this data be captured and linked to Spatial Hub?
Good question, Aaron. So there's a whole piece of work ongoing at the moment, led by Scottish Government, about a data transformation framework. And one of the first starting points of this data transformation is for public sector bodies to conduct data maturity assessments about how their organisation treats data. Now, we are actually part of that at the IS. We're part of the second cohort. So we're up to about 20 odd public sector bodies that have gone through this process. Now, that process should be highlighting those sorts of issues. The fact that qualitative data is being captured, but not in a way that can be actively used for analytical purposes to make better decisions. So we need to start challenging ourselves to be better structuring data and thinking about how it can be used more widely to inform our decision-making process. So I'm hopeful that this is the start of a process moving to a better place.
Well, it sounds like a positive starting point if these frameworks are in place and there's organisations like yourself are actually going through the process. I think it is. It's a kind of learning journey and experience for everyone, isn't it? Particularly as more and more and more people want data and there's more and more data available.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we just need to broaden.
Is that sitting with Shona at the moment?
Yeah, Shona Nicol is the data standards lead at Scottish Government who's leading that piece of work. But that really should be the conduit for us to challenge what we're doing around data.
Has there been any kind of update when that will be finished around that piece of work? Well,
I mean, how many public sector bodies are there? We can only do 10 at a time because we use we have 10 licenses for the data maturity assessment that can only be used one at a time. So, and it takes about 6 months to go through this process. So it's a very gradual thing, but it should start to highlight these issues. We basically just need to broaden the conversation out about what good data looks like, and it increase data literacy and data fluency amongst our organizations. I'm going to share some videos in a second in the chat which touch on some of these issues and might be useful for people to have a look at.
Yeah, no, that'd be great, and it's something that kind of correlates with what you're saying there, Simon, as well. When Roger was kind of raising his point, Liz from Scottish Enterprise had asked the question around was part of the issue a skills thing, and as you say, kind of raising the quality of the data and the understanding and the awareness that directly correlates with the skills challenges, which LDS are working on in partnership with AGI Scotland and the University of Edinburgh. So we know that those challenges exist, and we are trying to develop a roadmap to tackle some of those. Liz, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, it was just it was the fact that he'd mentioned, you know, these roles were either disappearing, or you know that the organisations are not appreciating that these roles have to be created in order to service that data. And I think, as I say, my point was that it exactly replicates what we're saying in terms of the survey we've done, and the responses to that survey and the indicators that it showed. And I think, again, it boils down to what we're saying here. Unless we get a comprehensive look at what the market's doing, and that's what part and parcel of what Location Data Scotland's trying to do, is to look at the market as a whole, define those gaps, and see where we can help find solutions for them. Part and parcel of that is, yes, obviously helping companies and signposting them to one another, but looking at that geospatial sector in general is really significant in identifying where we could be doing more work and making it a smoother transition for both the public and the private sector organisations to be able to utilise that. You know, we have a Geospatial Commission saying last week that Scotland's way ahead of the rest of the UK in terms of their geospatial activity, and we should be very proud of the fact that we are. But we need to make sure that we're filling these gaps and emphasising to those service managers within those organisations how critical it is for the benefit of their organisation that these roles are put in place.
No, that's great. Thanks, Liz, for raising and championing the skills aspect, which we've been working on. Aaron, you put your hand up there as well.
Yeah, another aspect I just wanted to, having worked in the third sector before, the third sector, because a lot of the kind of services are being outsourced and contracted out to the third sector, they're collecting data which then gets sent back to, in form of reports, but it gets hidden in those reports, and data is getting lost over there in terms of quite critical services that the third sector is providing, whether it's because they are contracted out. How can that be then brought back into the by the public sector, the local authorities, or some of these are being managed by the Scottish Government, the funding? How do they then pull back that data and make sure that it's not lost?
Yeah, no, that's actually a really interesting point.
Very good point. Yeah,
we've got some kind of third sector organisations within the LDS community, and we know that they're really keen to do more, and they do have the data. Oftentimes it's because it's kind of sensitive data, so it makes it a bit more difficult for them to make that available. And I think that ties in, Simon, to what you're talking around the kind of vulnerability side of things. It does make it a bit trickier, but certainly I think they are becoming more and more aware that they do have data and there are opportunities for them to share it. And I think actually there's a willingness also to collaborate to make the best of it. They might have to have a bit more of a careful think about how they release data, but certainly they want it to be used to improve services. In the case of certainly two of the directory members that I can think of without naming. Simon?
Yeah, we may have digital solutions that can help with that. Our colleagues in the IS are working on a project that will take, for instance, DWP data and split it into the local authority constituent parts, and then deliver it in a secure fashion to local authorities. So if there's a requirement for the third sector to do similar, we can help facilitate that potentially. So do put those people in touch with us. Yeah,
no, that'd be great. Oh, that's super. Thank you. Does anyone else want to jump in or raise any points around data, be that data they're looking for or challenges that they've experienced using data? Yep, Alan? Nope, you're on mute, Alan.
Rookie mistake. Yeah, really interesting conversation, and to some extent, personally find it quite frustrating because, to be honest, a lot of these issues have been around for literally decades. It's not new.
Yeah, yeah. And it doesn't matter what type of data either,
No.
be it location or other. Yeah.
It's just really frustrating to find that, there's still these fundamental challenges in accessing data and pulling it together and being able to exploit and share it, I don't have a silver bullet that answers any of that, by the way. However, I think some of it, it's interesting the conversation turned a little bit there towards just thinking about, certainly on the public side, think about data as an asset of the organisation. I don't know, Simon, if it's changed in local government, but certainly in my time within there and working within that community, data was very much an afterthought. It was very much, if you look at the balance sheet, it's about people, it's about property, it's about technology. We can put a value on that. Data, almost an afterthought, wasn't really treated as an asset at all. I don't know if that's changed a great deal. It'd be interesting to know if you feel it has, but I think there's just there's an education piece at that very senior executive level about data being an asset of the organisation. And it's an asset that supports their own business and can improve the way they run their own business, as well as actually providing an asset that supports the wider economy, the wider kind of social good. But I just don't know if that is getting through, Simon, and the kind of capabilities and competencies that then fall on the back of being able to govern data well. I just have a sense still that kind of whole competency piece isn't in place yet in a particularly sort of consistent way, if you like. There may be pockets where it works quite well, but I just think at a community level, it's just not quite there. And I just wonder if, as well as trying to tackle some of the fundamental problems of just sharing data and being able to exchange and get access to it at a more operational technical level, which has to happen as well, clearly, is how do we address the bit above that, which says, actually, if we get the buy-in at an executive level, that would make such a difference in terms of, treating data very much as a value proposition that can deliver internal and external value. So I just wonder if that has changed on the public sector side, Simon, or you see it changing?
Yeah. It's definitely changing, perhaps too slow for our like, but you are seeing snippets of it. You're seeing really good examples within some local authorities of a corporate data strategy developing. And analytics going on across their entire public service delivery. What I am trying to do is start to engage some of those bodies that we don't necessarily class as data networks. So the change and transformation managers, the organizational development people in local authorities, and reaching out, because I think they have a lot to offer. They're responsible for changing the makeup of local government in terms of the people they hire and what they put at the heart of their transformation and improvement. We recently published a new business strategy for the IS, and that's obviously goes through our board, which is represented by councillors and chief executives of local government. I did a search through that document to look for instances of the word data. There were over 120, which is brilliant, because that tells you that data is becoming a fundamental part of the argument about how we improve our public services in a world of declining funds. But it's always going to be difficult if you've got to weigh up a decision between recruiting a new social care worker or a data analyst. It's a very difficult argument to make unless you really fundamentally understand the power of data analytics and how it can shift the way that you do things. So it's a constant argument. It's a constant struggle that we keep needing to make. But I think the pandemic helped a lot with it. People started seeing data presented every single night on the TV to justify very difficult decisions. And I think if we can get that idea coming through in local government circles, challenging how councillors make decisions through the use of evidence and data, I think that will put us in a better place, fundamentally.
Yeah, no, that's good to hear, Simon. I think my other observation, now that I'm very much in the private sector side of things, is, and it's touched on again in this call, is how we actually bring the public and private sector closer together, because there's a lot of expertise, knowledge, capability sitting in a lot of the private sector organisations that could to some extent, fast track the speed at which some of that unlocking of data within government could be undertaken. I just wonder how we might go about that, because even if you look, no criticism if Alan Corbett's still on the call, but how do we get public sector round the same table, having these discussions, bringing that innovation into the discussion, because there is a lot of reinvention of wheels going on that I can still see. There's still a lot of data silos going on. And yet there's a lot of opportunity where private sector have had these challenges, addressed these challenges, could provide expertise, insight, knowledge to help government address some of these challenges. So again, I just wonder, how do we try and bring those communities a bit closer together? And you must find that as well, Ashley, in terms of all the engagement you're doing. So how do we make that join up a bit better?
And it still is a challenge, because there are still these almost kind of, certainly in the private side of things, there are kind of preconceptions about the unwillingness of the public sector to come to the table, and there are kind of constraints around procurement and whatnot, which is a whole other argument. But I think there are huge opportunities, as you said, Alan, to bring them together. And maybe LDS maybe it's an idea that we could have some sort of event where we are bringing them together and start to open up the conversation around. Again, it's about who's doing what. And just yesterday, both Simon and I were on a call, an AGI Scotland call, and there was a guest speaker who was talking about his work, and then someone on the call was like, "Well, we've already done that." But again, there's still that disconnect, and despite our best efforts at LDS of pulling them all together, there's so much happening that it's hard to stay on top of it all. And maybe that, as I say, that's an opportunity for LDS to actually bring these public sector bodies together with representatives from the private sector. I mean, we're doing it on the skills side of things, but maybe we need to do it more broadly as well. Alan, Corbett, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, Alan. And we've been around the houses with this in terms of what we've done. We've been looking at this for a long time. And this was one of the kind of reasons for, as Ashley said, the kind of LDS project getting the funding. It was to try and look at alternatives of how we can bring in the private sector and make it more joined up approach in terms of what we're doing. I still think there's a long way to go in terms of that, and there's only so many data agreements that you can sign in terms of what you're doing or try and facilitate. I think there's still a lot of work to go in that in terms of where we go. Definitely, and it's interesting what Ashley said there just now regarding the LDS project, trying to see maybe we do need to have a workshop or something like that, Ashley, to see how we can take that forward.
There could almost be a bit of a call to action. So if we could understand what the public sector challenges were in terms of what they're trying to work on, and we've done that in other sectors. I mean, we're doing that at the moment with the agriculture sector, where we've got these farmer co-ops that have got challenges, and we're bringing in Earth observation companies, bringing the two together. This is the challenge holder, this is the supplier, bring them together and hopefully solve the problem. And it's the same format that we could use here, but we need to understand what is it that public sector are trying to do, and then bring in these private organisations who, as Alan says, have possibly already done part of the work and or can work in collaboration to address some of them. You want to jump in?
I think it's both sides, actually, because I think, what are the problems public sector are trying to solve against reducing budgets and cost of technology, all the rest of it. There's that side of it, and what could public sector do there? But I think also it's what's the challenges from the private sector side, sorry, because Aaron touched on all the challenges of accessing data and even just finding out what data is available, Aaron, let alone getting a hold of it, then trying to aggregate it and standardize it. I think having challenges on both sides and having some kind of a forum by which we can bring some of that together would be a good thing for LDS to help facilitate, I would think. And that obviously is very much what LDS was here to try and help resolve, is where are the interventions that are required to allow us as a community in Scotland to move forward faster, better, smarter sort of thing. So I think it'd be a good idea.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. Thanks, Alan. Aaron, you had raised a question in relation to that as well, and it was asking whether the use of generative AI for data collection in the public sector has been considered. Presumably that's come off the back of your own AI work, but also the AI summit that took place this week as well.
Yeah, I mean, very early days, but just to see whether, because that most people are already stretched in whether it's in the public sector or the third sector with doing the existing work, and then getting data together, it means additional work. It kind of slows people down, and then how can we use it's something that if there's some funding, I'm sure there'll be people in the private sector would be willing to, or academia, willing to explore that, how it could ease that data collection process.
I think obviously these emerging technologies present opportunities. So,
can I give you an example of one, Ashley?
Yep.
That's why I had my hand up, actually. Nature Scott are looking at something like this. I'm not sure if it's part of the CivTech program or not, but their contractor is looking at something like language recognition AI to look at some of that poorly collected data that we touched upon, qualitative data, but looking whether you could draw out an inference to categorize what that data actually meant, so that it could be better structured and better used. And that's the sort of thing that we'd like to be able to do for planning applications, because quite often when you collect details about a planning application, there'll be a free text box that someone will fill the details in. So if you want to know whether that's a renewable energy site, for instance, unless you've got a box that actually explicitly captures that information, you have to go trawling through this free text box to look at whether it might be or not. So language recognition can really help with that, and if we can start building that into some of our systems, that will ease the burden about improving data at source. So yeah, we're beginning to look at that sort of stuff, but as always, public sector is well behind the curve, I think. Yeah,
actually at Optimat we're at the moment just undertaking a AI benchmarking and mapping study as well, because I mean it is very early stages in terms of Scotland AI, so we're kind of mapping it to see again where do the capabilities lie and which companies are out there doing it. So
this is a really timely conversation, actually, because Liz and Ashley and I had a chat this morning about the Year 3 LDS project and what it needs to deliver, and we've got down a whole series of events, the stakeholder events. But we've also spoke, and I spoke about it at the PSGA event, about potentially a Year 4 and 5. But it would be really great if you could drop an email to Ashley or myself or that kind of stuff, some of the stuff that you would like to see potentially in Year 4 or 5 that would help us kind of formulate a business plan to go forward to see if we can get some money to actually do this. Because one of the fears is that all the work that we've put into this LDS project and the fact we're starting to make a lot of progress in it after Year 3, it just comes to an end. Now we think there's definitely merit in keeping this going on, and the fact that it's an innovative project, first in the UK, potentially in the world in terms of geospatial sector coming together or cluster, and we're now starting to formulate things out that we never thought we'd be able to do before. And just the conversation there that Alan sparked up there just now about how we could integrate closer with the private sector, which is ideally what we're wanting to do, and how long that takes to actually get off the ground. These are the kind of key things that we want to try and start this LDS project delivering. That's just, that's fundamental to what was behind it, and also promoting and opening up economic growth. How we can do that to startups, in terms of that, not just your project, Aaron. So yeah.
Liz, did you want to jump in there?
Hi, I just wanted to see that the backing up Alan Corbett's point there, that I think as the project has developed from our initial outset, we've come across things that have made us realise there is so much more that we can do. But as with all of these sort of network integrated projects, it takes time. It takes time to find out who's in the sector. Takes time to know these people, and really only the actual delivery of worthwhile projects and worthwhile outcomes for the project really only happen beyond that initial engagement stage. And everybody thinks, 3 years is a good starting point for a project. Me personally, I think we should be changing that outlook to 5, because I think that's what it needs in order for these types of projects to deliver the huge benefits that the community expects from us. And like that, this collaboration, talking about a collaboration event between the local, the local government agencies and and the private industry members is huge. That would just create such a level of activity within the project itself, and the potential for the value of the outcomes of that, huge, absolutely huge. So yeah, we need to give our hands on and make sure that we, you know, that the work that we've done doesn't go to waste.
That's the point, though, isn't it?
Yep,
the 3 years are only scratching the surface. We're now just getting into the nitty gritty of it.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, we need more money to be able to make that a reality and bear the fruit of all the effort so far. I think that's the stage that we're at. We've got a better understanding, say, through developing this directory, who's all there, who's doing what, where the capabilities lie, where the challenges and the gaps lie as well. But we could have another 3 years of just trying to, as Alan Moore has said, pull those together. It's a never-ending task that grows more arms and legs as another week, month goes by.
In terms of, like Alan Moore's point there just now as well, you either need a project or some sort of government initiative or incentive to actually make this happen in terms of what we're doing. And you know, we in the AGI and this kind of circle, we've been looking for that type of initiative to go forward for many a year to actually give us a base level of what we've actually got in the sector, who's active in the sector, what they're doing, what their skills are like, what, you know, how many people they employ, all this type of stuff. And to keep it going and start to make it meaningful, I feel we're actually really getting there. So it would be a terrible, terrible waste if this thing was to drop up after year 3. You know, I think there's so many things that we could all collectively put in that we would like to see in years 4 or 5 in terms of what we're doing. You know, I'm sure Simon pointed out there in terms of the local government side of stuff. You know, there's so much private sector as well. We've hardly even scratched the surface in terms of what's going on. The space sector, the EO sector. You know, there's so many different things that we could do. The health sector alone. You know, in terms of what we're doing.
I'm just mindful of time, but Simon, Liz, you both got your hand up.
Simon, go ahead.
I was just going to mention CivTech. Is there any capacity to expand CivTech and for that to become a greater conduit of bringing these public sector challenges towards the private sector and really building that up? I mean, how many CivTech challenges were there this year? 12 or something? But can we expand that program potentially?
I don't know the answer to that, Simon, to be honest. I can go back and speak to people in the office and find out how the funding's looking for the CivTech challenges and if we could open that up. But that's potentially one of the ways we could potentially look at this and look at it as break it down into segments in terms of this is one of the things that you're taking forward, and the other one you could take forward is the skills side of it in terms of that, because the work that Bruce and Ashley's done in terms of the skills pulling together has been invaluable. It's been really, you know, it's the insight that we've started to get, which we've all kind of suspected, but we've now actually got the evidence base to support whatever way we decide to go and support going and looking, speaking to the higher education colleges to try and start technicians courses. And you know, we can now say that there's definitely an employment market in there. There's a vacancy in the market for that type of person coming into the industry, you know, and they would find employment and well-paid employment. You know, it's good to know the longevity of that employment. It's not something that's just a kind of 6 months temporary employment. You know, there's a proper career path.
Yeah, and that's for the organisations within LDS, that future-proofing aspect and making sure there is a flow of talent coming through will be essential to them to be able to develop products and services, both from a private sector perspective and public. Liz, do you want to have a final remark?
Yeah, it was just to say, you know, I think the point that particularly in terms of the skills, is quite simply that when we started this project, we didn't envisage that the skills would be such a huge element that we would be working on, and likewise a collaboration between the local councils and the private sector is another element that I could see would take up a lot lot of our time within the project to do, but it's only when we're getting to this stage in the project that we have any concept of being able to deliver those valuable interactions for the people. The skills is fundamental, to, particularly with schools, and telling the story of geospatial and the potential employment of geospatial to people in the in schools and to their parents, and explain to them, you know, what opportunities are there for them, because we just need to, you know, my point, I'm rambling a bit now, but my point is simply that we're just scratching the surface. We need, as a project, to continue to make that worthwhile and keep moving with it, forward with it.
Of collective action, then we've got a better chance of a better fighting chance of tackling some of them. But